Greetings, greetings. Eric Bakker, naturopath from New Zealand, author of Candida Crusher, formulator of the CanXida range of products. Thank you again for looking at this informative, what I hope to be informative video. It's a hot day here today. It must be 30 degrees today. What's that, about 90 Fahrenheit? So I'm looking forward to a winter time, nice and cool. Right, question. Does Candida not go away until you detox heavy metals? So here, a guy has asked me a question. I'm not going to mention his name because he wants to remain anonymous. He's from the States. Eric, I've heard that Candida will not go away until heavy metals are detoxified from the body. Well, you can read that on page 528 in my book, or 527 I think it was. From memory, I wrote 2 pages on mercury detoxification in Candida Crusher. There are several issues we need to discuss in this video, but there's a lot of BS. I'm not going to use the word, you can understand what BS means. There's a lot of BS online about heavy metals and mercury. Some people overstate and some people understate the effects. So I hope this is going to be a very useful video for those who want to know what I believe is the truth. Mercury can be a seriously bad problem for people, but I think it's definitely overstated by a lot of people. It's overestimated, certainly. If you really want to know if you've got a heavy metal problem, a good way to determine that, there are a couple of ways. You can go to a kinesiologist, but I find a more accurate way is to do a hair analysis through doctor's data. So you can do a pubic hair analysis or a head hair analysis. You just take 5 to 6 bits of hair from the nape of the neck and it gets sent off. It's only about 110 or 120 bucks for the test. And they're going to check for about, I think, 15 toxic metals and for about 25 or 30 different minerals. So what you will find though is some people can have seriously high heavy metal issues and no Candida at all. And you can also find a lot of people who've got no mercury or metal problem at all with big Candida. But what you will also find, in my opinion, you'll find a lot of people out there who've got metals right across the board because they're what we call pathological detoxifiers. They won't lose a lot of metal, so it will start accumulating, which weakens the immune system and makes them more susceptible to a whole range of different types of bacteria, viruses, including yeast infection. It's not just the Candida that these people suffer from. Many times they also have got completely destroyed beneficial bacteria levels. They've got parasites, they've got imbalanced flora, and that's because often when they get inflammation in the body, they could get reflux or heartburn or sore joints or fatigue or insomnia. So they get put on all these drugs by the doctor, which will just continue to wreck the gut slowly but surely over a period of years. So I used to do a lot more hair analysis than I have been doing the last 10 years of my practice. But in the early days, I certainly found a lot of people had considerable levels of the 4 sulfhydryl metals. So sulfhydryl metals are metals that have a particular affinity with certain amino acid detoxification pathways. And these are mercury, lead, cadmium, and arsenic. So those 4 tend to be probably the easy ones to remove from the body. But saying that, mercury is probably the hardest one out of those 4 to remove. Lead's not too difficult to remove. Aluminum, or what we say in New Zealand, aluminium, is not sulfhydryl, and you cannot detoxify aluminum the same way you can the sulfhydryl metals. So how mercury affects you, it affects you on multiple levels. One of the big things that it does is it actually gets inside the cell and it interferes with the cell membrane. So you have 6 trillion cells that organize and run our whole system. So when membranes get disturbed, cells can't communicate effectively with one another anymore. Mercury can even affect the RNA and DNA synthesis, so it can actually create chromosomal damage. And we know that from looking at research that's been conducted, particularly by Professor Boyd Haley in Kentucky, who's one of the world's experts in mercury toxicity. So when you get the cell-to-cell communication problem, it really renders the body very much incapable of fighting viruses, fighting bacteria, and even detoxification. So as I mentioned previously, these people are what we call pathological detoxifiers. So once they start getting a heavy metal problem, it quickly ramps up and it becomes a serious problem. The second thing that we find with people is that if they've got lots of amalgam fillings, and every time they have something acidic, they actually release methylmercury or a vapor. There's an interesting YouTube video you can actually see on a person's mouth opened up, and I think there's an acid placed in their mouth, and all these mercury vapors coming out of their mouth. I had all my amalgam fillings totally removed by an expert dentist, I think about 25 years ago now, in the days when you were considered to be a complete psycho when you talked about mercury toxicity. My doctor told me I needed to go to a psychiatrist because I said that I thought that mercury was a contributing factor to my Candida. So, and when I had a hair analysis done, the mercury was off the chart. I also had a high level of zinc and copper in the hair. And in my Candida book, I wrote about this, that the sulfhydryl metals, which are, can you remember them? Cadmium, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and lead. So those four metals in particular are quite similar in the respect that they very much affect a similar pathway in the body. So you've got this protein inside the cell called metallothionein. Now that protein has got a strong affinity for binding with heavy metals, okay? A much stronger affinity for the heavy metals than in fact copper and zinc. So zinc and copper bind to this particular protein in cell surface, inside cells, but when metals are in the body, they bind aggressively to metallothionein, much more aggressively, hundreds of times greater, which kicks copper and zinc out of the cell. So you're going to find an elevation often of copper and zinc outside of the cell, and in fact growing out of the hair, because if you've got a high blood concentration, it's going to be in the exterior tissue, in the nails and in the hair. So when you find a high elevation of copper and zinc in a hair analysis, it doesn't mean to say you're toxic with it. In fact, it means you're deficient with it. You haven't got enough of the stuff because your cells can't accept it. Now, lack of zinc and copper in particular is very bad from a detox point of view, because you really need those elements to detox. Zinc alone is responsible for well over 500 different enzymatic reactions in the body. So again, now you can understand why heavy metal toxicity can make you very sick, very sick indeed. Metals also have a very powerful effect on draining adrenal function. So it's a very strong stress in the body. So the adrenals become compromised and weak with this toxic load. Remember, the cells can't communicate anymore. There's a lack of copper and zinc in the body. And many other things I haven't got time to go into with this video. But the adrenals basically get drained, and the person ends up in a chronic fatigue syndrome state with heavy metal toxicity. So I've been raving on with this video about mercury, but I am passionate about mercury cleansing with people. And the question was, does it not go away until you detox heavy metals? Yes and no, okay? If you're concerned, do a hair analysis or go and see a kinesiologist. Go and find out how serious the problem is. If you're noticing, now pay attention, if you're noticing with the hair test high copper, high zinc, and either one or four or all of those metals are elevated, the sulfide, remember what they were again? Mercury, lead, cadmium, and arsenic. If any one of those are high, including copper and zinc, and especially if on the hair test you've got a lack of a lot of trace elements, then my recommendation would be, particularly with mercury high, is to get your amalgams removed. Okay, especially if you can relate to the signs and symptoms of mercury toxicity, because mercury can definitely, in that situation, really hinder your body's ability to get rid of Candida. Because remember what we said, poor immune function. If your immune system is not working or working half-mast, you can probably forget about effectively detoxifying the body from a yeast infection. So, and that's the yes part. The no part, if you've done a hair test or you've been checked out and you haven't got elevations of mercury, copper and zinc are in their place, I would not recommend you that you mess with the fillings, amalgam fillings, perhaps until you've reduced your Candida. But remember, first also make sure you have got Candida through a stool test, okay? Not through the spit test or other tests. They're not really that accurate. They will give you an indication, but they're not foolproof way. The stool test is the foolproof way. When you work through doctor's data, for example, they do a culture on the stool to see if you've got live yeast you're excreting in the stool, and they also do a microscopy to see if you've got dead yeast in the stool. So, and mainly you want to target assessing the gut to see if you've got a yeast infection, not the bloodstream. There's a lot of people believe they get live blood cell analysis done. They say, the doctor said I got a yeast all through my system. I got systemic yeast infection. Well, you'd probably be in Bloomin' Hospital if you had that. So don't fall for that one, okay? So I hope that answers your question and gives you a bit of information on mercury toxicity. Okay, it can be a really big problem. So make sure that you assess it and then treat appropriately. Thanks for tuning in.